first stand by.
Please touch bring one up
to you, and welcome to the House of Assembly in Castries, where this morning we were privileged to hear the throne speech from Acting Governor General Errol Charles at this second session of the Third Parliament of St. Lucia. And this afternoon, Prime Minister Philip J. Pierre will be presenting his first estimates of expenditure for the year 2021-2022. We have some very interesting statistics which we will give to you in a moment, going way back to 2015-2016 up to 2021-22, before the United Workers' Party were voted out of governance. In the St. Lucia Labour Party Manifesto, and I'm sure that Prime Minister Philip J. Pierre in his budget address will be referring to a lot of proposals from this manifesto, the manifesto of the St. Lucia Labour Party for 2021, which is entitled Putting People First. In that manifesto, then political leader of the St. Lucia Labour Party, Philip J. Pierre, said our country has gone through a very trying time of mismanagement under a UWP administration. Sadly, this mismanagement has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. We are left with a huge challenge of rescuing our country from an economic and financial disaster following a 5-year period of reckless borrowing and spending on an unprecedented level of corruption, I should say, and unprecedented level of corruption. In the meantime, he said, many displaced workers have been denied much needed income support as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I suppose that this afternoon he'll be speaking to a lot of this in his budget address. When we broke this morning, I was speaking to a number of things in the throne speech by the Acting Governor General. He spoke on health and security and said that his government will take steps to secure a better quality of life for all, and how this will be achieved requires that we make optimum use of our resources, even as we promote economic growth. The Governor General said that his government will initiate discussion on respectable living wages that promotes fair compensation for workers. In particular, and I'm sure the men and women of age would love this, in particular, our seniors, persons with disabilities, and single-parent households will be targeted for such measures. The Governor General went on to say, consistent with the desire to protect persons from certain shocks due to unemployment, as had been witnessed during the pandemic, his government will ask the National Insurance Corporation, with analyzing the feasibility of unemployment benefits, that's a biggie here, Says his government believes that healthcare must be kept on the front burner of priorities despite the waning impact of the pandemic, and that his government will pursue improved infrastructure, public infrastructure, at the primary and secondary schools. And his government advises that work on the St. Jude's Hospital, very topical, St. Jude's Hospital, will recommence during this session of Parliament, meaning this current financial year, and that his government remains committed to the goal of universal health care, underpinned by the principles of universality, accessibility, affordability, and equity, and that a special unit will be established to refocus efforts in that regard. As to climate change, he spoke to his government believes that it is its moral responsibility to support the commitment to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. He says our survival depends on that commitment, and so his government will play its part by being less reliant on fossil fuels, embracing the use of renewable energy, and building climate resilience and infrastructure. He called on international agencies to accelerate the pace and delivery of funding promised at international forums. For the sportsmen, he says his government will give priority to education and sport. His government will make good on its promises to resume the laptop program payment of facility fees and CXC examination fees in mathematics and English, modernization of the school plants. Some of them are in dire need of that kind of assistance, if you want to put it like that. And by the end of this session of Parliament, 50 smart classes would have been installed across the island schools in the pursuit of equitable lifelong education measures and building capacity in technical and vocational education and training, and information communication technology, ICT, will continue. A curriculum reform will proceed and include the teaching of St. Lucian and African history. That's a biggie here for me. The teaching of St. Lucian and African history. Very few of our students or our people on the whole know their own history, and that his government will continue to broaden sporting facilities across the island, including the construction of a national aquatic center, which will provide swimmers with the facilities to compete regionally and internationally. The much talked about youth economy was spoken of this morning. The Governor General said that his government had already begun the rollout of the youth economy, which will see an expansion of opportunities for young entrepreneurs through skills development, access to finance, and business support. Measures will target at-risk and unemployed youth. The youth economy will be structured with its own agency and board to provide greater autonomy and flexibility in decision making, and that the youth economy will create special areas in the economic system for young people to develop, grow their ideas, create generational wealth. It is intended to create new enterprise culture and reduce the constraints that our youth face in accessing business finance, training and support services to succeed in business ventures, and that the government, through the youth economy framework, will provide special incentives to support the integration of young people in employment generating and wealth creating business activities. I am here also this afternoon with Mr. Primus Hutchinson and Ms. Lisa Joseph. Primus, could you bring our Creole speaking listeners and viewers up to date with what's about to take place this afternoon and what has taken place this morning.
Merci autant Winston, Monsieur Madame, bienvenue encore pour face au public, session en Caille Parlement, bon matin, ouais, spéciale session côté gouverneur général fait présentation, après Sénat là, membre Caille là, t'es jeune ensemble pour parler à ce budget qui a fait présentation à ce après-midi après ministre là fait gros présentation ça là sur budget un budget qui a retenu 1 billion 842 millions 813 200 dollars pour le gouvernement qui a des plans pour amasser et dépenser un pays. Parmi c'est ça qui est plus important que le gouvernement a mis attention à ce monsieur madame et que vous venir sur la façon publique par NTN et aussi Facebook. Sécurité les citoyens, nous saluons que le gouvernement a mis un pile effort pour développer effort économique et pour essayer de baisser, pas seulement baisser, mais pour effacer, garder si c'est effacer le crime, parce que la situation crime là, on a servi physique contre la loi pays. Alors, nous avons mis le gouvernement a mis un pile attention à ça. Aussi, le gouvernement a mis police là, toutes ces ressources là qui sont utilisées pour faire bataille contre le crime. À la santé et sécurité, le gouverneur général a parlé sur le gouvernement qui a pris une démarche pour tuer un premier service santé au pays. Particulièrement, ça que j'ai parlé plusieurs l'année qui passée, ça c'est côté assurance de santé et pour aussi on payer un salaire qui est en faveur de tout le monde, particulièrement les travailleurs qui ont un plus bas salaire en pays et pour assister ces plus grands citoyens, ça qui déshabille les monde qui seulement papa dans kayak ish. Ça c'est un qui gouvernement a mis un pile effort à sous. Aussi gouvernement a mis un pile effort sur éducation export. Commencer à faire, j'ai commencé à faire éducation pour tuer laptop, programme laptop pour aider mon à payer prix pour l'examination CXC, maths anglais. L'autre affaire comme ça, il y a aussi pour les jeunesses, là il y a un programme pour les jeunesses pour aider à développer l'habilité avec l'État à diverses façons, en business, comme ça. Alors jeunesse, il y a regardé pour bailler jeunesse, qualité support à jeunesse, ni brisé, particulièrement pour travail et pour établir un business même. Aussi pour assistant à ce cas, ça c'est un qui a adressé un pile conditions pour plusieurs monde dans le pays. Le gouvernement a un programme en place pour adresser ça et aussi pour aider pour bailler développement local. Ça c'est un qui fasse ni qualité force là qui divisé à présent. Alors toutes ces diversités types de là, il y a en façon la constitution pays pour adresser ça. Pour la sécurité manger, alors ça c'est un qui est très important, monsieur madame, et que le gouvernement qui a regardé pour aider pour renforcer le secteur agricole et manger en pays, pour bailler les jeunesses et faire plus d'opportunités en direction ça là, et pour aider pour cette liste produit pli. Parmi ça, il y a aidé à ces bagages comme sirop miel et simos et l'autre affaire comme ça. Il y a un effort pour développer business ça là à cette liste. Enfin, il y a plus nous pour discuter entre semaines à venir et qu'on a écouté tout à l'heure pour le Premier ministre là parler plus à toutes ces affaires ça là en présentation qu'il a faite tout à l'heure. Lisa, I'm not sure if you want to add to what you said so far.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Primus. Thank you, Winston Springer. And good afternoon to all of our viewers on cable channel 122, as well as across our social media platforms. Promise, one of the very important aspects, and both you and Winston made mention of this, the youth economy, and certainly for giving the local economy that jolt, giving it some impetus, it will be very, very important for our young people to be able to find their place in the local economy, be able to see avenues by which they can certainly not just fend for themselves, but to create careers that would be beneficial to them, to their families, and so forth. And so the youth economy, we did see last year that the government of the Republic of China, Taiwan, had partnered with the government of St. Lucia by supporting the youth economy, and there was a signing agreement. And we've seen that over at the South Louis Community College that there is a Gateways program. So the government of Taiwan supporting, funding that along with the South Louis Community College to be able to provide hundreds of young St. Lucians the know-how, the wherewithal for them now to better position themselves in order for them to take advantage of the opportunities within the youth economy. So, the series of seminars taking place there, workshops, and they're really finding mentorship as well, which is critically important for young entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, to be able to learn from the experiences of the more seasoned entrepreneurs that we have in St. Lucia. And there's also that important aspect, because with the youth economy, and we've heard the Prime Minister say this, that the whole idea really is to break down those barriers that would prevent our young people from fully participating in the local economy. And one of those major barriers, Primers, yes, one of those major barriers would be access to financing. And so under this Gateways program over at the South Louis Community College, in partnership with the government of Taiwan, is the opportunity for individuals now to have access to for financing for their various entrepreneurial ventures. And so
agencies, I hope that involves lending agencies facilitating the process, because we know how challenging.
Well, this one would be specifically through Taiwan, but certainly under the youth economy, as the Prime Minister has explained, that the various agencies within the ambit of the government of St. Lucia will better facilitate, more easily facilitate young people in order for them to access that financing. And also by creating an environment to Primers. Angel funding is something that is critical, where individuals now can invest and come up with some shares equity with in a startup. So angel financing, very important for young entrepreneurs, as well as equity funds around the place. There's been some discussion about that within the halls of government, really being able to help our young people. As I indicated, this will be very, very critical for us to be able to sustain the local economy, sustain whatever energies it may have. We need that participation desperately from our young entrepreneurs.
Ok, monsieur, madame, pour les expliquer, particulièrement pour les jeunesses, qualité effort qui a fait avec le gouvernement a fait pour aider les jeunesses, pour développer divers business, quand les a expliqué, ça nous peut faire pays Taïwan qui a aidé cette lycée autant, qui a aidé autant, qui a continué à aider, côté ces jeunesses là, qui a trouvé assistance finance. Collaboration avec Taïwan pour ça établir. Bon, il y a un programme d'étudiants à South Louis Community College pour ces jeunes là qui sont montés là, participer, engager, apprendre pour trouver dans ça. Alors, l'autre part, la liste qui est très important, qui arrangement j'ai fait, le gouvernement j'ai fait arrangement, et puis c'est Jean Business qui a dit qu'il y a une pile expérience pour c'est jeune ça là ça apprendre à bailler alors il a fait plus aisé pour ça engager divers business là qui you guys try.
Just very quickly, Prime Minister, if I can add to that, the Governor, I think Governor General did make mention as part of the legislative agenda for the government for this financial year, alongside what we're discussing here in the facilitation of the business environment. He did speak to the movable properties bill and the credit reporting bill, two very important aspects here, because under movable properties, especially for young entrepreneurs as well, that you may not have some of those really big fixed assets that an established individual may have, but then you probably have some equipment, a vehicle, and so forth that you can certainly lend as part of your portfolio when you're facing a financial institution for loans and so forth. So critical in that as well. And then the credit reporting bill, for a long time we've been hearing the St. Lucia Chamber of Commerce speak about the establishment of a credit bureau. Certainly this sort of bill would be able to again facilitate an environment for the sharing of credit reports, making it so much easier for individuals, quick checks to be made and so forth. So we are looking at the creation of an environment that is going to be better facilitating for our young entrepreneurs and ensuring that, as I indicated, a more sustainable economy.
Well, looking at the budgetary statistics over the years, especially for statisticians who would be interested in these figures, the year 2015-2016, the current expenditure was $1,050,069,200. Capital expenditure was $414,166,800, making a total of $1,464,236, with an increase of 16.5 over the previous year. Wages and salaries took up 44.68%. Interest on loans 27.16%. Of that, the capital expenditure details are the Economic Affairs Ministry got 27% of what was going, health 13.02%, and infrastructure 11.49%. That meant that the Ministry of Economic Affairs got the major part of the budget in the year 2015-2016. In 2016-2017, once again, the Ministry of Economic Affairs got 30.7%, infrastructure 13.44%, and health 9.60%. In 2017-2018, once again, economic development 18.72%, infrastructure 16.78%, and agriculture 13.61%. 2018-2019, economic development 26.23%, infrastructure 18%, and tourism 11.25%. 2019 to 2020, infrastructure got 32.35%, economic development 19.23%, and agriculture 9.6%. 2020 to 2021, infrastructure 30.57%, economic development 22.88, and health 9.28. And in 2021 to 22, just before the elections, infrastructure 40.71, economic development 10.56, and economic development 14.59, and agriculture 10.56. And the recurrent expenditure for 2016-2017 was 1,100,318,800, with capital at 325,976,700, making a total of 1,426,295,500. I will just give you the total for the years, and you could break it down somehow. 2017-2018, 1,513,652,200. 2018-2019, 1,487,583,000. 2019-2020, 1,591,589,000. 2020 to 21, 1,697,312,000. And 2021-22, 1,638,600,000. The Labour Party, who are in government at the moment, in their manifesto, said that the policy of putting people first is as a result of St. Lucia experiencing the worst economic contraction among ECCU countries for 2020, which was 23.8%. Its public debt was just under $4 billion, the highest among countries in the Eastern Caribbean currency union, and has a debt to GDP ratio of 89.8%. And that data from the ECCB showed that for the period 2016 to 2020, St. Lucia's increase in public debt accounted for 60% of the increase of the total public debt among ECCU countries. They say that COVID-19 necessitated additional borrowing from all countries in the ECCU in the fight to mitigate the spread of the virus and the loss of life and livelihoods. However, St. Lucia has borrowed significantly more than others in the ECCU, yet it still recorded the highest number of infections and COVID-related deaths in the Union, over 5,286 at the time, an indication of the government's ineffective management, or the last government that is, ineffective management of the COVID-19 pandemic. The economic and the fiscal and economic strategy that the governing St. Lucia Labour Party planned, and that should be reflected in the budget this afternoon, is one, to have a comprehensive and independent review of the finances of the government of St. Lucia conducted by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, or the Caribbean Development Bank, CDB. Cognizant of the new challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, they propose to review and update the minimum or medium-term economic strategy for 2021 to 2026 in collaboration with the private sector and professional bodies, with a long-term vision plan of where we would want to see St. Lucia in 40 years, long term. Also provide greater support for cooperatives and credit unions in building and diversifying the country's financial architecture and to deepen their roles in providing solutions with greater avenues for savings and access to finance. Review major ongoing capital projects for scale and scope, with a view to providing the government with fiscal space and to ensure value for money is secured. They say that in conjunction with the International Financial Corporation and local financial institutions, this government would undertake debt refinancing with a view to securing lower debt repayments, renegotiate and consolidate existing loans to ease the burden of repayments. In collaboration with the private sector, transfer some government fixed assets to the private sector with the intention of converting government loan payments to lease rental payments to reduce the government's debt obligations. Also strengthen and consolidate oil revenue agencies with a view to improve revenue efficiency, reduce leakages, and improve the level of tax compliance. I've just been told that very soon we will see the entrance of the Speaker. We have not seen Prime Minister PA as yet. But before we go to the proceedings, like I said, which should start any moment from now, Primus, any updates to the Creole listeners and viewers?
Yes, Winston, Winston, nous avons préparé pour session commencer après-midi, côté Premier ministre qui a fait présentation à ce budget. Majorité, c'est le Parlement, ni à ce façade gouvernement et façade opposition, j'ai assez. Yo ka une discussion quand yo ka fait plus en plus c'est mon Parlement qui a commencé à entrer en préparation pour moi anyway monsieur c'est Wingerard on a qui est entré là les autres c'est vraiment là j'ai acide tout le monde engagé dans des discussions des conversations en préparation pour une présentation ça l'après-midi. Monsieur madame, alors nous là officier police là j'ai fait nous c'est ça qui a commencé cérémonie qui a commencé dans un petit moment alors nous avons ça puis tout à l'heure là Speaker c'est là et puis il a engagé ce même Parlement conversation. Alors nous avons ça a commencé tout à l'heure. Oui, nous avons regardé sur police là pour faire nous ça nous signe qui Speaker ça qui a tué pour session a commencé après-midi. Oui, parce que et j'ai nous avons regardé là et parce que 4h30 alors c'est une session qui a pris un petit temps. Premier ministre là a tué à présent Premier ministre honorable Philippe Jepierre alors ça a deux session qui a commencé tout à l'heure puisque toute préparation j'ai faite. Lisa, I am not sure if you wish to add to what has been said so far in preparation for the presentation of
Well, certainly, Lawrence, I know that everyone is eagerly awaiting. In addition to some of the areas that we have identified, education, I would imagine, is going to feature prominently, both in the estimates and later on in the policy statement for the government once the appropriation bill comes to the House a little later on in the month of April. And we did hear from the acting Governor General about the smart classrooms, and that has been a project that has been doing well for St. Lucia, again with assistance from the Republic of China, Taiwan, with the ICT in Education program. And so we've seen a number of smart classrooms established across schools on the island. And this really underpins the thrust now for us to really fully incorporate technology into our local economy to give it that sort of buoyance. We've now been given the thumbs up, if you will, Primus there, and the Speaker of the House of Assembly, Honorable Claudius J. Francis, is making his entrance.
Let us pray. Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding, we, thine unworthy servants, have gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with all evermore. Amen.
Good afternoon, members, and I only have a very short announcement. It's just simply to place on record this Parliament's thanks and appreciation to the members of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force, who even after a most trying day yesterday, found themselves here in the large numbers to participate. So I want to place on record our thanks and our appreciation to the members of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. Statements by ministers. Papers to be laid, Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Development and Youth Economy.
I beg to lay the following paper standing in my name. Statutory instrument number 25 of 2022, excise tax amendment of schedule number 1, number 3 order. Statutory instrument number 30 of 2022, fiscal incentives, Kelly Construction Services Limited order. Statutory instrument number 32 of 2022, excise tax amendment of schedule 1, number 4 order. National Insurance Corporation annual return, July 2019 to June 2020. Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure 2022 to 2023.
Minister for Tourism, Investment, Creative Industries, Culture and Information.
So, Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 21 of 2022, Tourism Stimulus and Investment, SDSL Limited Order. Statutory Instrument Number 22 of 2022, Tourism Stimulus and Investment, SDSL Enterprises Limited Order. Statutory Instrument Number 23 of 2022, Tourism Stimulus and Investment, SDSL Ventures Limited Order.
Minister for Health, Wellness and Elderly Affairs.
Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 26 of 2022, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Physical Distancing Number 3 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 27 of 2022, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Prohibition of Assembly Number 4 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 28 of 2022, COVID-19 Prevention and Control, Testing and Quarantine Number 2 Regulations. Statutory Instrument Number 29 of 2022, COVID-19 Prevention and Control Protocol, Public Omnibus Number 2 Regulations.
Minister for Commerce, Manufacturing, Business Development, Cooperatives and Consumer Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers appearing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 24 of 2022, Price Control Amendment Number 3 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 31 of 2022, Price Control Amendment Number 4 Order.
Report from Committee. Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Development and the Youth Economy.
Speaker, I beg to report that the Standing Finance Committee of the House met on Tuesday, March 29, 2022, and considered the draft estimates of recurrent and capital expenditure for the year 2022 to 2023.
Motion, leave it on, officer. Leave it on. Motion, Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Development and Youth Economy.
Be it resolved that the Honorable House of Assembly do adopt the standing report to the finance of the Standing Finance Committee on the estimates of expenditure for the fiscal year 2022 to 2023 in the sum of $1,813,200 and do agree that the said sum do form a charge against the consolidated fund and other funds of the state of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, I am humbled but privileged to present to this Honorable House the St. Lucia Labour Party's administration's first national budget and the estimates for the fiscal year 2022 to 2023. Since the overwhelming mandate given to it by the people of St. Lucia on July 26, 2021. As you are aware, Mr. Speaker, the estimates of revenue and expenditure statement is a precursor to the budget address, which will facilitate the introduction of the appropriation bill to Parliament on April 26, 2022. The pandemic's persistence and the Russia-Ukraine war present considerable downside risks, which warrant innovative and transformative policy interventions. These estimates aim at providing the platform for sustained growth, supporting the continued robust performance of our tourism industry, expansion of construction in the public and private sector, encourage prudent, responsible, and transparent fiscal management, implementing tools that will assist in significantly reducing waste and unnecessary spending, developing institutional frameworks designed to eliminate corruption, and an environment where there is substantial reduction in revenue from fuel. In essence, Mr. Speaker, the estimates of expenditure will fund projects that will put people first. Mr. Speaker, budget implementation performance for the 11-month period, based on latest available data, has generally been satisfactory. Notwithstanding the fact that we continue to face several challenges, including the current COVID-19 pandemic, the recent international developments in Eastern Europe, and the internal administrative constraints that we intend to address. Mr. Speaker, in the resource area, uncertainties concerning timely receipt of budgetary support funds, complicated government's cash flow management, and managing the growth in the stock of payables. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the fundraising challenges, government anticipates that by the end of March 2022, total resources that would have been used to finance the budget would have amounted to 1.584 billion, comprising 1.031 billion in domestic revenues, 54.98 million in external grants, 326.6 million in loan disbursements, and 171.4 million in treasury bills, notes, and bonds. Mr. Speaker, with just a few days to go before the end of the fiscal year, preliminary data suggests an expenditure of 1.584 billion, indicating underspending by some 54.29 million, or 3.3% below the approved estimates for the fiscal year 2021 to 2022. Of the total amount projected to be expended by the end of the fiscal year 2021-2022, Mr. Speaker, recurrent expenditure is forecast to achieve a utilization rate or an outrun of 96.1% of the approved estimates of 1.359 billion for the current fiscal year. The outrun is influenced primarily by the deferment in payment of salaries to public sector workers and lower than program outlays for project management expenses. Let me read again, Mr. Speaker. The outrun is influenced primarily by the deferment in payment of salary increase to public sector workers and lower than program outlays for project management expenses. In that regard, Mr. Speaker, employee compensation, which includes the cost of wages and salaries to employees and retirement benefits to pensioners, is expected to fall short of its target by 46.4 million based on the expenditure trend for the past 11 months. As stated previously, this outrun is attributed to the continued deferment of salary and wage increases, coupled with the impact of delayed recruitment to fill funded vacancies in the budgets. A notable change which impacted this expenditure line is the reclassification of salaries for some employees of Victoria Hospital who were seconded to the OKEU Hospital. Mr. Speaker, with respect to debt servicing, the government of St. Lucia benefited from debt service suspension by bilateral agencies such as the Agence Française de Développement, AFD, and the reduction in the variable interest rates such as LIBOR rates on loans from the Exim Bank. As a consequence, preliminary data indicates that total spending on debt servicing is likely to register a reduction of approximately 7.5 million to reach a total of 293.38 million by the end of this fiscal year. A total of 169.53 million is forecast as the outrun for interest payments, while principal repayments is anticipated to come to 123.8 million, which is slightly below the approved estimates. Based on the projected outrun, interest payments and principal repayments are expected to fall below the 2021-22 approved estimates by 3.19% and 1.55% respectively. Based on current expenditure trend for transfers, total spending on this category is forecast to increase by 26.6 million, when compared to the approved estimates of 149.76 million for the period under review. This increase was primarily influenced by the reclassification of compensation expenditure as grants and contributions to allow for payment of commitments under the Millennium Highway Complex. Additionally, various initiatives in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, namely income support granted to the bus drivers, are also expected to contribute to the positive variance for this expenditure line. The payment of school facility fees by the government and the reinstatement of the subvention to the St. Lucia National Trust are also contributors to the projected increase. With respect to the goods and services, which is the largest category, expenses are expected to fall below the approved estimates for the fiscal year 2021 to 2022 by 22.05 or 6.8%. This performance is attributed to combined effects of lower spending on training, supplies and material, operational maintenance and consultancy services, which offset increased expenses for rent and hire. The outturn onto the rental and hire vote indicates an increase of 3.6 million to reach a total of 74.9 million by the end of the fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, based on the current rate of implementation of some major projects over the past 11 months, we now estimate an outrun on the developmental side of the budget of 377.06 million. Some of the major contributors to the expected outrun include the Viewfort Water Sector Redevelopment Project, the Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Project, St. Jude Hospital Reconstruction Project, Constituency Development Project, Road Improvement Maintenance Program, PROUD Project, and the Emergency Response COVID-19 Project, and the National Roads Rehabilitation Program. Mr. Speaker, it is worth noting that despite significant underspending for some grant-funded projects, this has been offset by a higher than programmed expenditure on others, owing to more rapid execution and disbursements for major loan-funded projects such as the Viewfort Water Sector Redevelopment Project and the Road Improvement Maintenance Program. Of the total amount projected as the outrun for projects, 276.6 million are expected to be expended on capital acquisitions, buildings, schools, human resource centers and hospitals, and infrastructure, roads and utilities. Mr. Speaker, I have provided you with the expenditure outrun for the operations of government and will now give a brief summary of how we have and continue to finance these obligations. Mr. Speaker, on the revenue front, there was an improvement in domestic revenue performance during the 11th-month period of the current fiscal year, surpassing the outcome for the entire 2020-21 fiscal year by 45.48 million or 5.2%. Based on this development, domestic revenue is expected to generate a surplus of 23.44 million, equivalent to 2.3% over the approved target of 1 billion. This is expected to result from a 2.1% increase in tax revenue to an outrun of 927.85 million and a 7.7% increase in non-tax revenue, reflecting a projected outrun of 99.78 million. Mr. Speaker, despite the better performance against the approved estimates for 2021-2022, total revenue and grants is projected to fall short of the forecast by an estimated 39.93 million, as the projected shortfall in grant receipts is expected to outweigh the improved recurrent revenue performance. Notwithstanding the shortfall projected for the year, the outrun for total revenue and grants is anticipated to result in an increase of 152.79 million relative to the outcome of the fiscal year 2020 to 2021. Mr. Speaker, preliminary figures for the recurrent revenue indicate that since the COVID-19 pandemic was declared in 2020, collections have been much stronger than expected and have produced positive results in all tax revenue lines, save for excise tax, imports, and stamp duty. We now estimate the outrun for the recurrent revenue to be in the region of 1.027 billion compared to the approved estimates of 1.002 billion. This 25.92 million higher than our initial target for the fiscal year and 147.46 million higher than the outrun of 2020 to 2021. This positive performance is expected to come mainly from the following major categories. Taxes on income and profits is forecast to achieve a surplus of 16.91 million compared to the estimates. Taxes on goods and services, an average of 11.3 million is projected by year-end, the main contributor being 17.5 million and 10.12 million surplus from import duties and service charge respectively. Notwithstanding a modest improvement in receipts from import duty, which is expected to achieve a surplus of approximately 10.12 million, the performance is likely to be offset by significant shortfall in collections from excise tax on imports. Mr. Speaker, from the customs and excise end, excise tax on imports is expected to register a shortfall of approximately 19.1 million, reflecting the gradual erosion of the $4 per gallon charge on unleaded gas from the start of the fiscal year. On the inland revenue side, Mr. Speaker, a shortfall of 13.85 million is forecast by year-end for stamp duty owing to the lack of success in defending the government against a legal challenge to payment of the tax from the sale of the Bank of Nova Scotia to the Republic Bank Limited. Mr. Speaker, grants receipts from friendly donors and partners are expected to register a significant shortfall, estimated at 66.28 million, when compared to the approved target of 121.26 million for the fiscal year 2021-2022. The underperformance is influenced primarily by non-receipt of funds owing to delays in implementing key projects such as the Millennium Highway West Coast Road upgrade, the restructuring of the cul-de-sac bridge, generation of employment for private sector, and building resilience for adaptation to climate change and climate vulnerability, just to name a few. Mr. Speaker, based on the developments outlined previously, government's fiscal operations are expected to indicate a narrowing of the fiscal deficit from a target of 383.79 million or 7.9% of GDP in the approved estimates to an estimated 374.27 million or 7.6% of GDP by year end. When added to the principal repayments, a total of 498.12 million is projected to be disbursed from loans and treasury bills and bonds. The projected outrun anticipates total disbursements towards expenditure in the following manner. Loans, 326.64 million, treasury bills and bonds, 171.47 million. Mr. Speaker, allow me to present to this Honorable House the first budget proposals of my administration. This proposal has the following objectives: support government's agenda of economic transformation, job creation, particularly among the youth, accelerated economic recovery and growth, and reduction of poverty and increased wealth creation. I am aware that our island is acutely vulnerable to external shocks and natural disasters and the effects of the COVID pandemic. It is against this background that I propose to spend a total of 1.842 billion, the largest budget in St. Lucia's history. Out of this amount, 1.349 billion is proposed to be spent on recurrent expenditure, 382.6 million on capital expenditure, 110.5 million on principal payments or what we sometimes refer to as amortization. The total that we expect to received in revenue and grants is 1.327 billion. Total revenue, tax revenue, 1.016 billion, non-tax revenue, 133 million, and capital revenue, 10.7 million. Grants amounting to 176.6 million. We are projecting an increase in our GDP to 5.47 billion, which in part explains our projected increase in revenue. As a prudent government, we propose to change the trajectory of our primary as well as overall balances. With respect to wages and salaries, Mr. Speaker, our records indicate that from year to year, employee compensation represents an average approximately of 33.25% of the annual total budget. In the 2022-23 budget, a total provision of 590.70 million for wages and salaries, of which a sum of 560.56 million, or 94.89%, has been programmed to cover personal emoluments to central government employees, while 30.13 million has been allocated to cover compensation and other benefits to project staff. A sum of 108.55 million has been allocated to retirement benefits, of which 14.15 million is in respect of employee contributions to the National Insurance Corporation. Overall employee compensation is programmed to increase by 11.88% relative to the outturn for the current financial year. The allocated amounts also makes provision for in-year promotions and other salary and wage allowances. Public servants will be pleased to note that the government will keep the promise made by the former administration and pay the increase in salaries at the end of April 2023. Mr. Speaker, debt service obligations is central to every budget as we continue to implement policies geared towards prudent debt management and debt reduction. Debt service payments totaled 285.03 million for the fiscal year 2022 to 2023, a reduction of 5.3% relative to the approved estimates of 2021-2022. A total of 150.7 million has been set aside to service domestic debts, while 133.83 million has been provided for foreign debt servicing. Of the total amount allocated for debt servicing, interest payments account for 61.2%, or 174.47 million. A sum of 110.56 million is provided for principal repayments. Principal repayments are forecast to decline relative to the projected outturn of 2021 to 2022. Of the 110.56 million allocated for principal repayments, 66.7 million is for externally contracted debt, with the remainder 43.03 million being programmed to cover the amortization of domestic debt. Interest provision has remained relatively flat when compared to the 2021-2022 approved estimates, but increased by 4.94 million, or 2.9% when compared to the outturn for 2021-2022. Debt service payments fluctuates as new debt payments are added to or existing debt matures. Mr. Speaker, as it relates to transfer payments, which include grants and contributions, subsidies and public assistance, we are proposing to allocate a sum of 212.39 million, representing an increase of 20.4%, or 46.03 million above the projected outturn for 2021-2022. The increased allocation reflects provision made for the Millennium Heights complex as the government continues full transition of health services from Victoria Hospital. Mr. Speaker, as a caring government, we have also allocated resources totaling 20.46 million for the public assistance program, reflecting an additional 9.06 million to help meet the welfare needs of this country, as well as to meet outstanding obligations for services rendered to paupers by the St. Jude Hospital. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding that the Lucia Tourist Board has been provided with some level of economic independence by way of a tourism levy, the reality is there is need to provide additional support to its marketing efforts until sufficient revenue is collected to provide a level of security for unforeseen shocks to the tourism industry. To this end, a sum of $5 million has been allocated to the St. Lucia Tourism Authority for the new financial year. The Department of External Affairs has also been allocated an additional $900,000 to assist the department in honoring its bilateral commitments. Mr. Speaker, as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, we must reflect the increased inflows from in-transit fees from the cruise ships going to the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority and the St. Lucia Solid Waste Management Authority to support its operations. Mr. Speaker, I now turn my attention to the category of goods and services. My government proposes an increase of 19.35% or $58.69 million relative to the projected outrun for 2021-2022. The most significant increases were programmed under the operating and maintenance votes. The operating and maintenance vote received an increase of $17.38 million, reflecting additional resources provided under the Constituency Development Program under the Department of Economic Affairs, as well as the Departments for Home Affairs and National Security and the Department of Infrastructure, Ports and Transport. Provision was made for concerning services on the project expenditure, the continued acquisition of personal protective equipment, and rental of quarantine facilities. Mr. Speaker, the driving force behind the development expenditure program in the budget is the need to stimulate the economy through implementation of various projects. In that regard, my government has allocated some $561.06 million towards the implementation of various projects for the next fiscal year, comprising of $382 million of capital and $179 million of recurrent expenditure related to these projects. There may be a source of confusion between project expenditure, which I just referred to, and capital expenditure provided in the budget summary. The project expenditure figure does have a component of recurrent expenditure, which is not included in capital expenditure. This classification was necessary to provide a true indication of the total cost incurred in undertaking a specific project. Mr. Speaker, as it relates to capital expenditure for the new fiscal year, my government has allocated some $282.65 million to its capital program. This amount is made up of $12.67 million in locally funded capital expenditure and $269.98 million in externally funded capital expenditure. The proposed capital budget represents $104.11 million, or 72.8% increase over last year's revised estimates of $278.54 million. It is important to note that capital expenditure constitutes 68% of the total development budget of $561.06. This amount represents $167.32 million, or 70.2% increase over last year's revised estimates of $393.74. This is primarily due to emphasis placed on infrastructural development, 30%, economic development, 22%, health, 8.08%, agriculture, 5.95%, and education, 5.25%, accounting for approximately 71.23% of the capital budget. Of the total allocation of $561.06 million for development projects and initiatives, $170.20 million, or 40%, is proposed for the Department of Infrastructure, Ports and Transport. This amount will cater for payment of new and outstanding DFCs, reconstruction of bridges such as the Cul-de-Sac Bridge, rehabilitation of roads such as the Millennium Highway Project and for other ongoing road maintenance and rehabilitation projects. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Economic Development and the Youth Economy has been allocated 126.84 million, accounting for 22.6% of the development budget. The allocation for projects under the department represents a 224.7% increase over the approved budget allocations for 2021-2022. The developmental program for the department goes to primarily 4 major projects, namely the Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Project, 43.7 million, the Constituency Development Project, 28.9 million, St. Jude Hospital Reconstruction Project, 28.1 million, and the implementation of the youth economy, 10 million. Mr. Speaker, much has been said on the St. Jude Hospital Reconstruction Project, and more details will be provided in my budget address later in April regarding the way forward for this project. However, a significant percentage of the allocated resources for St. Jude Hospital are to cover outstanding liabilities of the project. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Health was allocated 45.31 million, or 8.08% of the development budget to the Department of Health to cover 1. The cost of the COVID-19 response, improvement in health facilities under the OECS Regional Health Program, commencement of the Universal Health Care Program, remedial works on the National Stadium currently housing the St. Jude Hospital. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Agriculture has been allocated a sum of 43.47 million, or 5.95% of the development budget, to facilitate the completion of ongoing projects such as the Viewfort Water Supply Redevelopment Project, and also to undertake various initiatives aimed at protecting food security. Mr. Speaker, the sum of 30.49 million, or 5.2% of the development budget, is also being proposed on behalf of the Department of Education for the coming year. Of the total amount allocated to the department, 64% is to cover the cost of activities under the EQUIP project. Therefore, emphasis will primarily be placed on the continuation of the renovation of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, continuation of new blocks such as the Laguerre Combined School, the Gordon Walcott Memorial School, the Miku Secondary School, the Enchipo Secondary, and Sufre Comprehensive Schools. A sum of 3 million has been allocated for the rehabilitation of schools. Mr. Speaker, central to the preparation of any budget is the identification of financial resources to cover the expenses that will be undertaken during the fiscal year. I now turn my attention to the revenue projections for the year 2022 to 2023 fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, with the resurgence in economic activity that is expected in 2022-2023, the draft estimates have targeted total revenue and grants in the sum of 1.328 billion. At the projected level, total revenue and grants is forecast to increase by 248.1 million, or 23% above the preliminary outrun for the fiscal year 2021 to 2022. The forecast comprises of 1.15 billion in recurrent revenue, 10.7 million in capital revenue, and 176.7 million in grants. Grant receipts are expected to contribute an additional 121.7 million compared to the 2021 outrun of 55 million. This increase can be attributed to major progress over the last 2 years towards the procurement processes for 4 major grant finance projects. Mr. Speaker, recurrent revenue inflows are projected to increase by 148.6 million relative to the approved estimates for 2021-2022 to reach a total of 1.150 billion for the fiscal year. When compared to the revised estimates or outrun for the preceding year, recurrent revenue increased by 122.7 million, or 11.9%. The increase stems from slow but sustained recovery during the latter part of the fiscal year 2021 to 2022, and the continuation of the recovery anticipated in the tourism, construction, and agriculture sectors during the new fiscal year. The total projected recurrent revenue for 2022-2023 is comprised of tax revenue of 1.016 billion, or 88.4%, and 133.9 million in non-tax revenue. Tax revenue is forecast to increase by 9.5% in comparison to the output for 2021-2022, while non-tax revenue is expected to increase by 34.2% compared to the revised estimate for the preceding year. Mr. Speaker, the increase in tax revenue is influenced by the continuation of the recovery in economic activity resulting from the easing of COVID-19 pandemic. The significant increase in non-tax revenue is projected as a result of the higher anticipated CIP inflows expected to be deposited in the NEF, National Economic Fund, pursuant to the National Economic Fund Act. Let me add, Mr. Speaker, that we hope that the CIP program does not suffer from any adverse international shocks. Mr. Speaker, I will now turn to the details of the projection for some of the major revenue lines under the tax revenue category. Taxes on income and profits. Taxes on income and profits are projected to amount to 256.1 million, up by 20.7 million, or 8.8% above the revised estimates for 2021 to 2022. This reflects expected increases in all the components of this category of revenue, namely income tax on corporations, income tax on individuals, withholding tax, and arrears. The projection for the main items under this category is as follows. Income tax on corporations. The revenue of income tax on corporations is expected to generate 73.1 million for the financial year 2022-2023, representing an 18.75% increase above the budgeted amount in 2021-2022, and an 8.69% increase above the outrun for 2021-2022. This reflects an upward trend as corporate profitability rebounds as a result of the higher economic activity expected from relaxing adjusting restrictions on social events, end of curfews, and discontinuation of confinement, which had been implemented to manage and control the in-country spread of COVID-19. Revenue from income tax individuals is expected at 114.8 million. This represented a 2.9% increase from the 2021-22 revised estimates and reflects the anticipated uptick in the level of economic activity. The number of individuals projected to return to full-time employment is expected to increase, particularly in the tourism and construction sectors. Income tax arrears is projected at 49.8 million, an increase of 10.9 million, or 28.2% from the outturn of 2021-2022. The projected increase in corporate profitability, along with the increase over the medium term in the employment rate and collection of arrears in withholding tax, will positively influence the revenue outcome for this line. Mr. Speaker, taxes on international trade, customs duties are projected to increase by 14.15% to reach 236.4 million in 2020-2023, up from the revised estimates of 208.9 million in 2021-2022. This revenue category accounts for 19.28% of recurrent revenue. Of the total amount to be collected from taxes on international trade transactions, 126.4 million is expected to come from import duty, 103.5 million from excise tax, 4.4 million from throughput charges, and 2.1 million from passenger facility fees. The improvement in inflows from this revenue category is driven by the general increases in the CI value for imported products. Taxes on domestic goods and services are expected to generate 515.7 million, which is 8.43% above the revised figure for 2021-2022. This reflects mostly the projection for VAT on domestic activity collected by the Inland Revenue Department and excise tax receipts from VAT collected by the Inland Revenue Department that account for 28.9% of revenue for this category and is projected at 106.9 million, which represents 13.9% increase relative to the 2021-2022 outrun. Value-added tax VAT from international trade transactions collected by the Customs and Excise Department is projected to yield 165.5 million in 2022-2023, which is 5.38% above the outrun of 157 million in 2021-2022. As the economy rebounds, a higher level of economic activity is anticipated in the construction sector over the medium term. Mr. Speaker, airport tax is projected to record an increase of 16.41% or 3.6 million above the 2021-2022 outrun to reach 25.5 million for the new fiscal year. This projection is influenced by the high revenue intake anticipated from an increase in tourism arrivals, including stove arrivals, expected to increase by approximately 26.2% in the new fiscal year. Service charge on imports is projected to increase by 6.94 million, or 8.41% above the outrun for 2021-2022 to reach 89.5 million for the new fiscal year. This projection is influenced by the higher revenue intake anticipated from an increase in economic activity during this current fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, revenue collections from taxes on domestic goods and services account for 50.74% of total recurrent revenue and 44.83% of tax revenue. The 2023 projection for non-tax revenue is 133.9 million, or a 44.18% increase over 2021-2022 outturn. The main contributor to the increase in inflows during the current fiscal year is expected to be the contribution by the National Economic Fund, in-transit fees, and sale of goods and services. The following are the major components of non-tax revenues and the expected performance in 2022 to 2023. Mr. Speaker, given the passage of legislation for the establishment of the National Economic Fund, inflows from the CIP are expected to be deposited in the NEF. In light of this, revenue for voluntary transfers reflects anticipated receipts of 65 million from the National Economic Fund. Mr. Speaker, it's my government's intention to make an application to the NEF to request the use of some of that money to finance the St. Jude Hospital Stadium project and a 40 million to contribute towards the debt principal requiring a bullet payments. Overall revenue from voluntary transfers is anticipated to increase by 24.9 million or 59.8% over the outrun for 2021-2022. Mr. Speaker, receipts from in-transit fees. Receipts from in-transit fees are projected to increase by 44.8 million or to 8.02 million when compared to the outrun for 2021-2022. This category reflects a fee charge to cruise ships passengers who have not disembarked from the vessel at port. An increase of 4.2 million is projected in 2022-2023, and this revenue line will be favorably impacted given the return of the cruise industry, the gradual increase in the number of cruise passengers, and cruise ship calls. Revenue collection from the sale of goods and services are projected to record a sum of 59.01 million, reflecting an increase of 8.3 million or 16.41% over the revised estimates for the previous financial year. The major revenue lines contributing to the increase of 8.3 million include motor vehicle driver licenses and sale of drugs and vaccines. Motor vehicle driver licenses. Revenue from motor vehicle licenses is projected to record an increase of 3.01 million when compared to the revised estimates. This category is positively correlated with the number of driver licenses renewed and the number of vehicles imported annually. Increases are generally observed every triennium. The last one being the fiscal year 2019 to 2020. Consequently, this increase is anticipated in 2022-2023, given the upcoming triennium. Revenue collections from this category is expected to increase by 1.02 million. That is income from property taxes, Mr. Speaker. Property taxes on commercial properties, to reach 4.14 million for the new fiscal year. This projection represents an increase above the revised estimates for 2021-2022. Grant revenue. Based on commitments and arrangements signed with development partners, grant revenue is estimated at 176.7 million, reflecting a 121.7 million increase compared to the projected outturn for 2021-2022 fiscal year. This amount represents 46% of the total capital expenditure program for the new fiscal year. This more optimistic forecast is predicted on disbursements anticipated from continuation and commencement of projects to be funded by the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, JICA, the Taiwanese government, the UK Caribbean Infrastructural Partnership, UK CIF, the European Development Fund, EDF, and the Caribbean Development Bank, CDB, and the United Nations Environmental Programming Unit. Mr. Speaker, while we anticipate moderate improvement in revenue administration and grant receipts from friendly donors, a significant financing gap remains. As was highlighted earlier in my presentation, based on the projected revenue for revenue and grants, the budget targets an overall deficit of 394.57 million for the fiscal year 2022 to 2023. When added to principal repayments for the financial year, a gap of 505.1 million is anticipated, which will be financed by a blend of foreign and domestic financing resources, in addition to the total revenue of 1.327 million. It is anticipated that my government will have to borrow a total of 505.12 million, comprises of 425.4 million, equivalent to 84.2% of the total financial requirement for the year from external sources. And domestic financing is expected to be moderate, given that much lower amounts are programmed from bonds, treasury bills, etc. This is entirely in keeping with my government's strategy of relying on external borrowing on concessional terms rather than market debt, which bears higher interest rates. Domestic financing requirement amounts to 79.7 million, which is expected to be sourced through various means, including treasury bills, treasury notes, and bonds. The total amount to be raised from external sources will be as follows: Caribbean Development Bank, 57.3 million. International Development Association, 82.3 million. Republic of China and Taiwan, 191.8 million. CARICOM Development Fund, 3.06 million. CDB Inter-American Development Bank, 8.6 million. Canadian Clean Energy and Forest Climate Facility, 1.4 million. World Bank Development Policy Credit, 81 million. Allow me, Mr. Speaker, to highlight some of the expenses that government will undertake in this final year in some of the ministries. Mr. Speaker, an additional amount of $10 million is programmed under the Constituency Development Program, to undertake small community infrastructural projects. An additional amount of 7.27 million program under St. Jude Hospital Rehabilitation Project for settlement of outstanding liabilities. Mine. Yeah. The briefcase also. $300,000 was approved to facilitate St. Lucia's ascension to the Caribbean Court of Justice. $954,800 was approved for outstanding amounts owed to Ojo Labs, whose contract expired in October 2021. $1 million was approved for the disaster fund. $1 million was approved for the distress fund. In the Attorney General's office, 500 was approved to procure the services of additional legislative drafters, and $2 million to facilitate the payments of settlements agreed in court cases. Provision of $1 million was made on the Consulting Services and Commissions Office of the DPP to account for the appointment of a special prosecutor and support staff. The Swift Justice Project for the backlog of cases, $456 million in recurrent expenditure. That is to the backlog of cases in the courts. And a further amount of $2,278,600. The project breakdown, Mr. Speaker, for the Swift Justice Project is as follows. Salaries, $487,100, traveling, $135,000, stationery supplies and materials, $81,500, electricity and water, $63,000, rental and hire, $1 million, operation maintenance, $12 million, plant machinery and equipment, $456,000. That is to clean up the backlog of cases that exist in the